Hello and welcome to Unpacking Terms. The term we're going to be unpacking today is structured input. And what I'll present here is an abridged, simplified version of the great work by Bill VanPatten. He is the one who coined the term structured input. He is the one who proposed it. So today it's all about him. So what is structured input? It is essentially a way of presenting and having learners engaged with input. The goal is to help them make form-meaning connections in the most efficient way possible. Structured input is one component of a bigger approach that's called processing instruction, also proposed by Bill VanPatten. Processing instruction is a pedagogical approach that takes into account how learners process input. Again, how they make those form-meaning connections. The premise of processing instruction is that we can only process so much at a time. In other words, if we can understand something without processing every little detail about it, then some forms don't get processed or are less likely to be processed. Processing instruction has three components: explicit information, structured input, and structured output. Today, we're only going to be focusing on structured input. I do want to make a quick note about explicit information. There's been studies that show that explicit information is not really what is driving the success of processing instruction, but actually it's structured input that is helping the learners make those form-meaning connections. Structured input has some very specific key qualities. The first one is keep in mind how learners process input. Indeed, just like we said before, processing instruction is all about how people process language. The second one is one thing at a time. So you'll see that many structured input activities focus on one particular conjugation, like third person singular, and it's all third person singular. Sometimes it's one particular contrast, present and past. But again, maybe we keep it all in first person singular. The third one is don't forget the meaning of form-meaning connections. Structured input tends to focus on grammar, yes, on form. We want them to process the form, but it has to be in a meaningful way because we want them to make form-meaning connections, not just form-form connections. The fourth one is sentences first, longer discourse later. Our brain can only do so much at a time, so we need to go slowly, little by little. The fifth one is multiple modalities, oral and written input. It doesn't have to be within the same activity. This is in terms of within a lesson. And the sixth one is exposure is not enough. Learners should do something with the input. And I'll show you examples of structured input activities in a minute. First, let's discuss what we mean by processing strategies. Essentially, whatever can efficiently help us comprehend the gist of it. And I'm going to be paraphrasing a lot of the processing strategies that VanPatten has outlined. The first one is meaning over form. When we process language, our priority is to understand the message. And so if we can do that without processing every single little form, then good enough for the brain. The second one is content words over small morphemes. Again, very similar to the first one, right? If I can understand that you're talking about past tense without processing the ed ending, then good enough for the brain. And of course, we tend to process or rely on non-redundant forms more than redundant forms. What does that mean? Let's look at an example. In this sentence, we have, in the past, I used to play video games a lot. Look at the second sentence. I used to play video games a lot. Do you see that used to now becomes redundant? I already understood in the past. You told me in the past, got it. No need to process that used to. But in the second sentence, I need to process the used to understand that it was a habitual action in the past. A key aspect of structured input activities is location, location, location. We tend to process forms that appear first at the beginning of the utterance. So in this example, you see that the used to gets buried in the middle of the sentence. That's the worst location. So how can we manipulate the input so that the learners really see that used to, used to, used to, used to? Well, one thing we can do is structure it in this way. And let's say maybe in this particular activity, the students have to say whether that's true or false. Here's an example of a structured input activity that I created. And as you can tell, yes, I like dogs. What you will notice here is that the students need to process wakes versus go, third person singular versus third person plural, in order to answer whether it's one dog or all three dogs. That's how we are trying to push them to process the targeted form. But we're still keeping it meaningful. They're learning about these dogs. And then in step 2, we emphasize meaning and content even more by having them take a look again at what Max does and then conclude whether he is a couch potato or a high energy dog. So they still need to go and pay attention to what those items mean. This is what's called a referential structured input activity, because the correct answer, Max or three dogs, depends on the form. Referential is one type of structured input activities. The other type is called affective, like in this example here. The learner's answers don't depend on the form. The learners are engaged in expressing their suppositions about the country, which the instructor will then confirm. And it is meant to provide students with additional input, still structured in a way where we're keeping in mind the learner's processing strategies. Structured input activities sound fantastic, but they require a lot of careful planning. As you saw, you need to be thinking about how you're going to position forms in a particular way, how you're going to keep statements relatively short, comprehensible, and how you're going to give a context to all of those items. And perhaps you're wondering, so wait, does that mean that I need to provide input in a structured way all the time? I really like this quote because it summarizes what structured input is intending to do or to be within the curriculum. And it says, whereas comprehensible input drives second language acquisition, structured input appears to be useful in speeding up the process. So in other words, we're not saying that comprehensible input in the form of stories or reading or watching a video, etc., is not good input. Nobody's saying that. What we're saying is that perhaps we need to be more intentional to increase the odds of acquisition. Structured input cannot guarantee acquisition, but we can maybe be more intentional about how we present the input to the learners so that we push them to process certain forms. There's certainly a lot more to unpack. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time.